Afternoon. Welcome to Transportation and Public Safety Budget. We'll get right into it today with our budget hearing. We'll open the hearing on Kansas Highway Patrol, and we'll start with our analyst, Merle Riedel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Merle Riedel. I'm with Legislative Research. Today I'll be reviewing the Kansas Highway Patrol, the agency's request, and the governor's recommendation. I just would refer to, should have a document stapled in front of you with a blue band across that says Kansas Highway Patrol. Just very quickly on page 1, just to review, the mission of the Kansas Highway Patrol is to provide protection of life and property through the enforcement of traffic, criminal, and other laws of Kansas, and support Homeland Security initiatives. Other services provided by the Highway Patrol include training to law enforcement officers for the detection and apprehension of drunk drivers, motorist assistance, title inspection of cars being titled in Kansas, and motor carrier assistance program. The agency operates the Kansas Highway Patrol Training Academy in Salina to provide training for new recruits and continuing education for sworn officers. I would then refer the committee to page 1480. Looking at the top, the Kansas Highway Patrol Operations Fund. The Kansas Highway Patrol received its funding primarily from state general funds prior to FY 2023, effective July 1st, 2013. They received SGF prior to 2013. Effective July 1st, 2013, the agency's primary source of funding is the Kansas Highway Patrol Operating Fund, whose funding source is transfers from the state highway fund. So in 2013, the agency switched from being an SGF supported agency to supported with the highway fund. And this would be sort of considered as the Highway Patrol is really the law enforcement agencies for the state's highway system. So it receives support from the highway fund. Kansas Highway Patrol Operation Fund expenditures have remained primarily consistent from FY 2014 to FY 2022, with expenditures ranging between $52.3 million and $56.5 million per fiscal year. The FY 22 legislature added $5 million in salaries and wages expenditures from the fund in FY 23 to enhance the career progression plan for troopers and law enforcement officers, including Capitol Police. Next, we'll move on to page 1481, where we'll begin the 2023 analysis. You can see under legislative approved, after the 2022 session, no adjustments were made to the $110.5 million approved for the Kansas Highway Patrol for FY 2023. Then we move down to the agency's request. So the agency submits a revised estimate of $130.6 million, all from special revenue funds in FY 2023. This is an increase of $20.1 million above the 2023 approved amount. This revised estimate includes 880 FTE positions, which is unchanged from the FY 2023 approved number. So you might be asking, what is part of that 20.1 million increase? So we'll review some of those adjustments. Item number 2, you'll see Law Enforcement Aircraft Fund. The revised estimate includes an increase of $9.7 million, all from the Aircraft Fund, which provides a total of $11 million for the replacement, upgrade, and maintenance of law enforcement aircraft assets. This includes $9.2 million for the purchase and equipping of an Airbus H-125 helicopter and a single-engine Cessna Caravan airplane to replace previous aircraft. This also includes upgrading the forward-looking infrared radar camera systems on two existing Cessna 206 airplanes. These expenditures were approved by the 2022 legislature for FY 22. However, acquisition of the aircraft was delayed, and the agency requests simply shifting those expenditures from FY 22 to FY 23. Item 3 is the Executive Aircraft Fund. The revised estimate includes an increase of $9.1 million, all from the Executive Aircraft Fund. The increase is primarily attributed to the purchase of a Cessna CJ3 jet to replace the previous plane, which dates from 2001. This expenditure was also approved by the 2022 legislature for FY22. However, acquisition of this aircraft was also delayed. The agency requests shifting expenditures from FY22 to FY23. Moving on to the next page, 1,482. Looking at item 4, capital improvements, the revised estimate includes an increase of $1.7 million, all from special revenue funds, for increased capital improvements among the Highway Patrol facilities. The increase is primarily for the repair of damages sustained by the training academy in Salina during a December 2022 storm, and implementation of a scale house replacement plan involving the first of 8 facilities to comply with federal highway requirements. Item 5, salaries and wages. The revised estimate includes a decrease of $106,391 in salaries and wages expenditures. Item 7, you'll see a list of other adjustments. And then finally, we go to the governor's recommendation, and the governor concurs with the agency's revised estimate in 2023. The governor recommends no changes. And Mr. Chairman, I can stand for questions, or I can move on to FY 2024.
Any questions for the analyst on 23? We'll move on. Representative Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, you say it was delayed. The Cessna was delayed. Do you know why? Have any idea?
So, Mr. Chairman, I can't address that. Representative Ellis, part of it is delayed. The other challenge is when the 2022 legislature approves an expenditure in FY22, that usually occurs at the end of the legislative session. So that's when the agency knows it's secure. So they really have a small window from April to June to execute those purchases. And so the agency is simply saying it was difficult to execute those purchases, to work out the agreements with the vendor. So I'm not aware of any specific issue. I don't know that there was necessarily delays, supply chain disruptions, though that could have been part of the problem. I think it's a matter of timing.
Over on page 1482, salaries and wages. It was a decrease in salaries?
That's a net decrease in salaries and wages. And so part of that, the decrease you'll see is attributed to decreased expenditures for items like holiday pay, decreased expenditures for overtime, and decreased expenditures for some employer contributions for fringe benefits.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is just a general question, and I'm not sure if you'd be able to provide an answer, but with respect to the aircraft fund, and we're replacing aircraft, what takes place with the aircraft that we're replacing?
Right. So the legislature included proviso language that one of the previous helicopter would be traded in as part of the purchase of the new helicopter. And I believe that, and I can't remember for certain, and the agency will follow me up, may have more details on this, but I don't believe there's a requirement to sell a previous airplane.
I'll ask the continuing question when they come to the podium. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, because I'm not quite clear on this. The $9.2 million on number 2 for purchase and equipping the Airbus H-125 helicopter. Is that helicopter going to be equipped with a FLIR forward-looking device?
That is my understanding, that it will be equipped with a FLIR and some other equipment that's provided for that. But the agency may have more specifics on that.
What I'm asking is that included in that $9.2 million, or is that extra?
I believe the FLIR for the new helicopter is included in that 9.2.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anything further on 23? All right, we'll move to 24.
All right, looking on page 1,484, the agency requests $112.9 million, all from special revenue funds for FY 2024. This is a decrease of $17.6 million below the 2023 revised estimate. The request includes still 880 FTE positions, which is unchanged from 2023. So what were some of those adjustments? The Law Enforcement Aircraft Fund, the request includes a decrease of $9.7 million, all from the Aircraft Fund for FY24. The decrease is due to expenditures occurring in FY23 for the purchase and outfitting of the Airbus helicopter and the Cessna Caravan, as well as upgrading FLIR systems onto existing helicopters, and those expenditures do not reoccur again in FY 2024. Item number 2 is the Aircraft Fund. The request includes a decrease of $9 million, all from the Executive Aircraft Fund for FY 2024. Again, this is an instance in which that purchase will happen in 23, will not reoccur in 24. Capital improvements, the request includes a decrease of $57,234, all from special revenue funds, for capital improvements at Kansas Highway Patrol facilities. Decrease is primarily attributed to projects at troop facilities in FY23 that do not reoccur in 24. Salaries and wages, item 4, salaries and wages. The request includes an increase of $755,595 for salaries and wages expenditures. The increase is primarily attributed to increased employer contributions for fringe benefits in FY 2024. Item 5 is gasoline. Agency simply requests an increase of $189,332 for gasoline expenditures for law enforcement vehicles. Agency notes it's seen an increase in fuel, or anticipates an increase of fuel of 7% in FY24. You'll see discussion of other adjustments. And then moving on to the next page of 1,485 under the governor's recommendation, the governor concurs with the agency's revised estimate and makes no changes for FY 2024. I would direct the committee to page 1,506, which is the capital improvement report. So this simply isolates some of those capital improvement expenditures. You'll see a table that lists the projects along the left. For FY 2023, the agency submits a revised estimate of $2.9 million, all from special revenue funds for capital improvements in FY 2023. This is an increase of $1.7 million above the 2023 approved amount. The increase is primarily due, again, to those repairs of damages sustained at the Training Academy in Salina on December 15, 2022 storm, and implementation of a scale house replacement plan. You can see some of the details of the projects. For example, Troop J, which is the Training Academy in Salina, they're major projects. Troop J Training Academy, minor projects or less than $50,000. You'll see projects at the various troop facilities that are greater than $50,000. Projects at the various troop facilities less than $50,000. And looking at the top of 1,507, page 1,507, on the right side, you'll see Troop I, which is scale, repair, and replacement. The agency requests $1.1 million, all from special revenue funds, for scale house repair and replacement. A 2008 review recommended replacement of 8 motor carrier inspection stations, including scale houses, to comply with federal requirements. For FY 2023, the agency will replace the North Olathe station, and the governor concurred with the agency's revised estimate for FY 2023. FY 2024, the agency requests $2.8 million, all from special revenue funds for capital improvements. This is a decrease of $57,234 below the FY 2023 revised estimate. And the decrease is really at the troop facility major projects. And that's partially offset by increased expenditures for major projects at the Training Academy and continuation of the scale house replacement plan, including the second of 8 facilities. And you'll see towards the bottom on Troop I scale house repair and replacement. For FY24, the agency will replace the South Olathe station. And the governor concurred with the agency's capital improvement request. And I would note that this capital improvement budget has been heard by the Joint Committee on State Building Construction, and they concurred with the governor's recommendation. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my overview. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Any questions for the analyst on 24? Representative Delperdane.
Thank you. Appreciate you going through it. Just a quick question on this page 1484. You had line item 4 on the salaries and wages. What percent of increase overall is that? I mean, it's a raw number, but is it a 5%? Is it a 3% or?
I'd have to look. I can provide that percentage.
I thought we heard in here it was a 5% raise column, but I'm not sure.
Correct. There is a 5% increase that the governor is recommending, a statewide increase. That is not part of this budget. That's not part of the amounts on this budget. That's appropriated to the State Finance Council. That gets broken up when those funds are certified. But that 5% would not be included in these amounts.
Okay. And then I assume we're going to hear from the troop themselves. The other question I've got will be for them. So thank you, sir.
Anything further? All right. Thank you, Merle. We will move on to Colonel Herman Jones.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Am I on? Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members here. Appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you on the budget for the Kansas Highway Patrol. Obviously, I'm not going to do this by myself. I've got the professionals behind me there, the CFO and also commander for some questions that may come up for our aircraft. So, but basically, you'll have an overview of some of our operational initiatives that we have, that we've started and what we want to go with. And obviously some of the things that our initiatives are upgrades of our equipment, in-car videos, our computers and other equipment that the officers have, but also for leadership training of what we've initiated and we want to continue on, and you'll see that. Our recruitment is obviously a big key to bringing new individuals into the agency as well. So some of the enhancements that we've put into that right there. And also cybersecurity, which is a very key item of contemporary topic that we want to cover with that. And then also when we're talking about, we've had some questions about our aircraft. Our budget that it comes before you is for the replacement of some of our older aircraft, where we were getting a new fixed wing, a new helicopter. And part of that was, as we discussed, or the question was about the current aircraft of the helicopter was to replace that, or at least a trade-in for the new helicopter there. So that was a question. And also it's been brought to my attention that some of the individuals from the House have been interested, instead of trading in the helicopter, of keeping it and going on and using that. That way we have a force multiplier by having 2 helicopters versus 1. Obviously, that we're willing to go with whatever the House and legislators want to agree with right there. It does provide another aircraft for the state. Whereas that the state of Kansas, the Kansas Highway Patrol is the only law enforcement air support for the entire state. So the only thing that would come from that would just be the financing of that right there. There wouldn't be any finances as it stands right now if we were to keep that. If we trade it in, that's money that goes towards the new helicopter. So. But for that, then I just want to give that that information there. Then our CFO, Sherry Mackey, will give more details about the funding of those special options. And if you have any other questions or so, we'll stand for that when she's done. And then also, again, we have our commander of our air unit that's here to go to more specific or details, technical questions that we can answer on that. Okay, thank you.
Challenge my IT skills. I have this. I can share it if you want me to. It's whatever works best for you. It's up to you. Oh. So you want to signal? Or are you going to be talking during it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Would it be easier for you to signal?
Oh, that's fine. Okay.
Sorry. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I probably should talk to you before. Sorry about that. All right, Mr. Chairman, while she's getting that set up, my name is Sherry Mackey. I'm the Chief Fiscal Officer for the Kansas Highway Patrol, and you should have a PowerPoint on your desk. We also have it up here for you to review as well. And I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to come here and talk about our budget with you. All right, so we will, can you hear me? Is this on? Okay, okay. All right. So you should have a copy. So turning to the agenda, the slide 2. All right, so today I'm going to provide the committee with a high-level overview of the agency's budget. We concurred with the governor and what she recommended, so you'll see these are the same budgets basically as what she had submitted. Within the presentation, I'm going to touch on some of the key initiatives. I know we have some new faces here, so I'll talk a little bit about the budget structure and how we prepare our budget. Also about the methodology, kind of what I did, taking out some outliers, some of that type of stuff. So I'll touch base on that methodology as well. And then I'm going to go into a little bit more in-depth review of the numbers, hopefully not put you to sleep on that. So where we got the numbers for both fiscal years. And then I also want to provide the committee with an update on our ARPA funding that we had asked for, as well as some of the coronavirus funding that we had gotten, what we used it for. Okay. All right, so on slide 3, talk about some of the key initiatives for the agency. Merle had provided some of our performance metrics in your handout previously, but we are still focused on working on those key metrics. Every program we have, for the most part, has some type of metric that they measure to, and we use those to identify key initiatives for the agency. We had an in-car video initiative that we're about halfway through now. It kind of went over from fiscal year 22 into 23. Leadership training is a very important initiative within the agency. We have West Point training that we conduct out at our training academy, as well as other leading conferences, initiatives that our uniformed officers as well as our civilians attend. The colonel talked a little bit about recruitment efforts, and we're focusing on making sure we're at the right place at the right time so we can get recruits into our academy. Server upgrades, we're obviously focused on cybersecurity initiatives. And then lastly, our TRIARC accreditation. We're one of very few agencies that have a TRIARC accreditation for law enforcement communications in the training academy. Turn to slide 4. So this is a little bit about the KHP's budget structure. The KHP budget is reported by program. So you'll see various, there's about 10 core programs that we have here. Administration, positions like myself and the colonel. Operation support is the lion's share, and I'll show it in some of the other slides what piece of our budget operation support is, but that's the uniforms for the majority of that. Expenditures, thought it'd be interesting to point out to you, salaries and wages are the main contributors to our expenditures. So as a percent to our total budget, in fiscal year 23, 58% attributed to salaries and wages of our total budget. And then in 24, it's 68%. And that's because of some capital outlay that you'll see that we had in fiscal year 23. As a percent to our appropriation fund, we talked about that in 2013. That is what you appropriate to us. And I'll talk about some of our revenues, but the percent to the appropriated fund in both fiscal year 23 and 24 was 71% with salary and wages. That fluctuates. I've seen it go up to as high as over 80% at some time. So you can see where the expenditures are for our agency. Revenues for the agency are received through 4 sources. State Highway Fund, or is what I'll refer to as the appropriated fund. We have federal grant funding. We have some local grants we get as well. Special revenue fee funds. We talked about our vehicle identification and some of our various fees, training academies, and that we get different fees for that. So that supports those operations. And then we have some other things and donations. We're the administrator for the Partners Program. And so law enforcement vehicles, we purchase those for local sheriff's office. We also get donations there. So that just gives you an overview of kind of our expenditures and where we get our revenue and how the budget's reported. So turning to slide 5, talk a little bit about the methodology, probably similar to what you've seen in the past. We've maintained the approved budget from the 2022 legislative session for our appropriated fund. And there's a slight, and that was for 23, there's a slight increase for 24.79%. And I'll get into some of these expenditures a little more detail so you can see where the increases were. So I analyzed 4 years worth of our expenditures, took out any outliers or non-reoccurring events. We had some COVID expenditures in there that were removed. The Partners Program I talked about because we can't forecast that. We don't budget for that. And then we had some major projects that were removed. IT system softwares, in-car video phase 1 that I talked about, and on-premise servers. So those are some very large expenditures that won't reoccur in 23. But then we did have the personnel adjustments. Thank you to the legislature for the approval of the increase for the pay for our CPP. Major projects, phase 2 of the in-car. And we have some OITS and IT expenditures talking about our cybersecurity and strengthening our systems. And then also applied the key budget indices that were published by the department, or the Division of Budget. Slide 6 gives you a little more detail of where in our programs that the increases or decreases were. Much like Merle said, we have a budget increase of almost $33 million, and you'll see that's attributed to our operation support. Mainly, it's going to be our salaries and wages, our aircraft, where we're shifting the expenditures into fiscal year 23 for those new aircraft. And then motor carrier inspection, we're just a pass-through. We're a subrecipient for KDOT. So based on what they allow in the budget, we put that in our budget. So that's where most of the increases are coming from. There's some offset with some decreases, but mainly increases. So as we turn to slide 7, I want to share with you key variances by category. So this, I believe, with Mr. Chairman, the representative's question on where some of our salary and wages increases came from, we'll provide that. So for fiscal year 2022 actuals, what we actually spent compared to fiscal year 23, our adjusted request for salaries and wages, it increased by $11.12 million. Salary increases were the CPP, so those are the salaries and the hourly rates paid to our uniform officers, shift differential, overtime, and it was a net of 8.91 increase for that. We also had an increase in some of the benefits between fiscal year 22 actual to fiscal year 23 adjusted request of $2.2 million. So basically what we contribute to the civilians as well as the uniform officers, that percent changes from year to year. Contractual services. So those are services we have maybe an outside source do. That increased $3.39 million. And most of these increases you're going to see for fiscal year 23 are going to be due to our aircraft and what was involved in purchasing that. So the self-propelled services, $2.7 million was due to the aircraft purchase. And then we had some net of miscellaneous contractual services. Moving to slide 8. This is a continuation of the variances by category. So again, 22 actual versus 23. Our commodities increased by 823. So every other year we put in our budget for uniforms for our officers. So this will be a year we've just started ordering new uniforms for all the officers. And there's some other equipment materials related to the aircraft purchase. Capital outlay increased $16.7 million, again, mainly attributed to the aircraft purchase. We had some other equipment. So the FLIR that you were asking about, that was included for $1.6 million. We have basically flip-flopped our trucks and our passenger cars. It's Chargers and Durangos, and it's what's available and what we can get. So those will flip-flop back and forth. But that is a program that's self-funded too. It's self-sustaining. And then there's some other increases, and you'll see in that attributes to the $16 million. Capital improvement, our 5-year plan, it's increased $1.7 million to $2.8. And you see Mother Nature got us in the training academy. So we had almost a $600,000 roof that we had to put out there. We did get funding back from KDEM on that. So we appreciate their working with us, but it was timing. We had to pay for it. So, and then we have some elevators that need repair out there. And then we talked about the Troop I scale house. There is a federal mandate. So we're working through that with our motor carriers, trying to get those replaced and get that plan in place. On to page 9, slide 9. So this is just expenditures by category, what I shared with you as a percent to our total budget. This particular slide is our fiscal year 23 expenditures by classification. So again, you can see of our total budget, salaries and wages are about 58% in 23. A capital outlay is 22, again, because of the large purchases of aircraft. And then it goes down from there, the other various categories. On to page 10. So this is pretty much a repeat of what you've seen before, but this is fiscal year 24 budget requests compared to what we're asking for fiscal year 23. So you'll see a lot less variances with the exception of the aircraft. This was a net budget decrease of $17.6 million. And again, $18 million in aircraft operations is the lion's share of that. And then I'll share with you, turning to slide 11, we'll kind of go through those same categories, going through salaries and wages. It was an increase of 756. Again, based on our fringe benefits we have to pay and all of that, there was a slight increase there. Our classified regular increased by about 197, and then benefits was 560,000. Contractual services decreased by the 722, again, attributed to computer fees, self-propelled, the aircraft, some engineering fees that weren't going to reoccur. Commodities decreased by 589. I talked about the clothing that we had. A lot of these expenditures shift from commodities to contractual services to based on the need of the agency. And then capital outlay. You'll see that again, the aircraft, non-reoccurring expense, and some of the equipment that went on there. On slide 12, same graph, but for fiscal year 24, you'll see the expenditures a percent of total budget. Salaries and wages bumped up to 68%. Those capital outlays are non-reoccurring. Capital outlay went down to 11%, contractual services to 10%, and then it goes down from there. And our aid to locals, if you have and wonder what that is, that's mainly our homeland unit. And so we're providing funding. Again, they're subrecipients through us of federal funding for maybe it's cybersecurity, training, whatever. So they get that through our homeland unit. Turning to slide 13, I wanted to illustrate for you expenditures by program. So I told you that's how we budget by program. You'll see operations support is in fiscal year 23 is 51% of our operation. Again, you'll see a large capital outlay in the aircraft, which kind of diluted that some. So that's why it's 51%. Administration 6, our aircraft operations 18. And again, we kind of go down from there, but that'll just give you a visual of where the expenditures are within our agency. On slide 14, same information, but for fiscal year 24. In fiscal year 24, you'll see the operations support bump up to 60%, again, as a percent to total budget. Includes all of our federal funding and all of that. Administration 8, aircraft operations drop back down because they don't have those large capital outlay expenditures. Slide 15, talk a little bit about our revenue and what we get by our fund. So you'll see on this slide both fiscal year 23 and 24. So we talked about the 4 sources on here. So our special revenue, Merle had mentioned that we have, as of 2013, we started getting all state highway fund, and we'll talk a little bit about the appropriated fund here in the next couple slides. So in 23, it's 48% of our revenue comes from that. Our fee funds, we get 34% of our revenues. Federal grants, 9%, and then other that I talked about is about 9% as well. Switching to fiscal year 24, that special revenue jumps up to 56% for state highway funds, and then our fee funds, 32%, and then 10 and 2 for the other two sources. On slide 16, talk a little bit about what I termed the appropriated fund. Might be a little easier to see up here than on your graph, but so 2012 we had a mix of highway funds in our SGF, so state general fund, and then beginning in fiscal year 23, all funds are from the state highway fund. So that's the lion's share. And as a visual on the next slide, on the next page on 17, you'll see a graph of kind of where our expenditures have been in that appropriated fund. And finally, on slide 18, a little bit about the coronavirus funding that the agency received. In fiscal year 21, we received $975,000. And you'll see it was through remote dispatching system as well as PPE. We also had $788,000 that was a civilian mobility, so laptops for civilians, so that gave them the ability to work from home. We did not have that before. Fiscal year 22, we had some layover, some of our PPE purchases. And then for fiscal year 23, the agency had asked, submitted for ARPA funds numerous times. On January 30th, we were notified that the radio modernization project was awarded $15 million of the initial $20.76 million that we had requested. And this award is going to be sufficient to cover the replacement of the KHP radios and equipment. And then there's a network system infrastructure involved with that. But we are working with the supplier, because when you buy less, sometimes we don't have all the discounts. So we're trying to figure out what that impact is at this point. So, and just note, those were all one-time purchases that we had requested. So with that, I will stand for questions, clarification.
Any questions for the agency? Representative Delberdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Got a series, if you don't mind. Okay. First off, on page 16, just curiosity here. It looks like years 2007 through 12 where you're getting SGF funds, and then it went to zeros. What changed?
We no longer get state general fund.
Was it a statute change? Or what?
I believe it was the legislature. Unfortunately, I wasn't there at the time, but I believe it was through the legislature. And Merle, do you have? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Delberdang, that was really an action that was made possible through an appropriations bill. The legislature decided that that the state highway fund would be a more appropriate funding source rather than SGF, because of the relationship between the highway patrol and the state highway system. They felt that was a better suited revenue source for that agency.
Right. And then you briefly mentioned the aircraft, but obviously it shows up in the 23. That's already approved, isn't it, from the 23 expenditures, or is that something we're doing today?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Delberdang, yes, so the monies were actually encumbered in fiscal year 23. That's why we were shifting them. So all of the POs have been issued. I think they're working with some small things they have to purchase otherwise, but the majority are already encumbered in for 2023. Yes.
And it sounded like there were some questions on what to do with one of the old helicopter. So the first question I've got, because I believe that was at one point in time crashed, or shall we say landed pretty hard, had repairs. Is it safe going forward? That's my main question.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Delberdang, I'm say yes, it is. They've been flying it now. I know it's been under some repair. I can certainly invite the captain up here if you have more questions. He can probably, hopefully he's shaking his head behind me. So yes.
Okay. And then if we do not trade that in and we end up with 2 helicopters, which is fine with me, are you open to proviso or something to get one of them stationed down to Wichita, which the city of and the county of purposely did away with theirs, depending on yours, and then suddenly there was none there. So any comments on that?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, that's my understanding as well. So we are the only air enforcement in the state of Kansas, and there were several agencies that did discontinue their air operations and then rely heavily on the Kansas Highway Patrol for that service.
You mind if I go with a few more? Okay. December 15th of 22. What happened up there in the training academy? I mean, as we're looking at $2.9 million for improvements or repairs or so. What happened there?
Mr. Chairman and Representative. So the majority of that was almost $600,000. So the roof of the training academy over, I believe it was the auditorium and the library, it had blown off once before, but this time it took the majority of it off. So we had to replace that roof on the training academy. So that was the lion's share. We were also looking at our elevators that can't pass load tests. There's some of that. So that academy is definitely showing wear and tear. And so we're trying within our fee funds, and what we can do is to repair as much as we can. But the lion's share was that roof that blew off, and it was December 15th. Yeah.
Okay. And then the final question on page 1507, it's Troop I. It talked about scale repairs and replacement. Is that, I thought you had briefly mentioned possible KDOT pass-throughs. Is that a pass-through, or is that SGF, Chairman, or where's it coming from? It's obviously not SGF, but.
Yeah. So the comment on the pass-through was our motor carrier inspector. We are a pass-through. So whatever we budget with KDOT, that's what we put in our budget. So it's just a pass-through. As far as the scale replacement, that's our true buy. There was a study done early on, prior in 2008, I believe it was, recommending to replace all of those. There was not the funding to do that. So they basically deteriorated over time. So now it's reemerging, and we believe we may have some funds internal, so special revenue funds, to start replacing those. I talked with the captain over there. He said that there may be a possibility of working with KDOT or the federal, and they may help us with some of that funding. So we are trying to get that replacement plan in place and then move forward. We have not bid those. We will have to bid it, and then we'll bring that back to joint building. But that is just working with federal funding or already funding that we have within the agency.
Okay, because it looks like it's required for federal requirements. So do we even have a choice on it? Is it something we must do, or?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll have to double check on that, but based on weights and performance, I believe it has to be at a certain level. I can check with the captain. I believe it's something that it was a recommendation to do. I would have to find out if it's federally required.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. On page 5, middle of the page, under analyze for your prior revenue expenditures, the second bullet, 1122 Partners Program. What is that?
So that is a program that each state is, Mr. Chairman, sorry. That is something that each state has a agency within the state that's identified, and we are the conduit for federal programs or federal purchasing consortiums. And what happens if you have a local law enforcement and we are now just doing vehicles. And if they want a vehicle, they contact us. We actually put the order in for them. They pay us. Once it comes, we pay the supplier. So it's a service that we provide for local law enforcement.
I understand that perfectly now.
Okay.
I didn't know what that was. Okay, thank you. And page 13 or slide 13, you have on there Turnpike Patrol 3% budget request. I was under the impression that the Turnpike paid for any and all troopers' salaries, cars, whatever. Is that, am I wrong on that, or is that something in here that I'm not seeing?
Mr. Chairman. And so Representative Weigel, no, you're absolutely correct. So it's in the budget, and we only budget the salaries and wages. So we talked about those funding sources that we have. So exactly that, we're a pass through. If they decide they're going to spend $400,000 on salary, they pay us $400,000. It is a piece of our budget, but it's one of those different funding sources that I talked about. It doesn't come out of the appropriated fund. So I do not budget like contractual services, commodities, because we don't know at this point what they're going to buy. They will try and do consistent like radar, things like that in those cars. So they'll buy those, but they'll utilize our contracts. And sometimes we buy them in bulk so we can get a better deal. And then they pay us for those. So you're exactly right. They pay 100% for everything that they purchase through us.
Thank you for that. One more quick question on the same page. Vehicle identification number. Is that doing like VIN checks to make sure the tag meets the vehicle? Is that what that is?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, you're exactly right. So that's our vehicle identification number, the VIN. That's what they work on there. Mm-hmm.
I think that's everything except there's one thing on here that I didn't see, and it has to do kind of with the air operations. How many pilots do you have that are, qualified pilots that are flying all of the patrol's assets?
Mr. Chairman, if you will, I will invite the aircraft captain, Captain Vanderwide, answer that question.
Hello, Mr. Chair. I'm Jason Vanderwide. I supervise the aircraft unit for the state for the Highway Patrol. We have 16 pilots, including myself, over 3 bases. We have bases in Hayes, Wichita, and here in Topeka, 16 total.
Okay. And along with that, are they trained through the Highway Patrol, or does some pilot apply here and say, "Yeah, by the way, I'm a pilot, and do you need an extra pilot for that Cessna?"
Representative, we do a combination of whatever is frugal for the state and the Highway Patrol, and also for timing on our. Sometimes we outsource training. Sometimes we use our instructors in-house. We do a combination of both to get to where we need to be the quickest and the cheapest.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are we about 60 troopers short?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, so it's my understanding what the number that's been is about 52 that we're short. Now, obviously, I think the agency would like to have more, but I think if they can get to that is my understanding, and I'm going to look to the colonel.
Still have 12 graduates or have?
Mr. Chairman, the current class, I believe, has 12. Yes, has 12 in it currently.
And with this wage increase, will that bring us up the comparison with the other states that surround us?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, I can answer what I've heard through the grapevine. If the colonel needs to come up here, he can. But so what I've heard is that that was greatly appreciated. It did an enormous favor for the agency to do that. And as soon as that went in place, now we're starting to see the other agencies starting to give increases there too. So
The
other states, yes.
Race to the top. Thank you.
I don't know. Yes. Mr. Chairman, would you like to hear from the colonel? He can probably speak a little bit more to that.
Yep. If you've got something to add, yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Chair, Representative, you're correct. Again, we were greatly appreciative of what the legislature did for our CPP program and for the increase. But as it would have, immediately after we increased here in our state, our partners across the state increased. Missouri has increased. They're working for a legislation to increase quite a bit. Nebraska, Iowa, all of our partners that we look to have increased. Even the locals have increased in that. So it although we are always looking for the best and the qualified and those type of things right there, obviously there are individuals that look at the dollar amount right there. So that's what we are. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anything further? All right. Thank you very much. All right. We will close the budget hearing on Kansas Highway Patrol and open the budget hearing on Office of Adjutant General. Merle?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we will review the Adjutant General Department's FY 2023 and 24 request and the governor's recommendation. Again, we're looking at a budget analysis document with a blue band across the top that says Adjutant General's Department. Looking on page 1, The Adjutant General's Department provides for the organization and readiness of the Air and Army National Guard, implementation of statewide emergency management programs, and homeland security for Kansas. The Kansas National Guard has approximately 7,000 members across the state in full-time civilian jobs and performing federal military duty during periods of scheduled trainings or other prolonged periods. So those are not technically employees of the state. That's not a workforce of 7,000, but that is 7,000 part-time members that are available. Moving on to page 1,374, you will see a table at the top, expenditures and financing. This table depicts all the expenditures and financing. You'll note that a large portion of this agency's budget is financed from federal funding. And specifically, we highlight some of the COVID-19 relief funds. You'll see a gradual decrease in the availability of those COVID-19 relief funds, which was expected as those funding from those bills and those sources were to be depleted at a certain point. Moving on to page 1,375, we'll go into the FY 2023 analysis. Under legislative approved, you'll see the 2022 legislature approved a budget of 137.4 million, including 31.6 million SGF for the Adjutant General's Department in FY 2023. Several adjustments have been made subsequently to that amount, which changes the current year approved amount without additional legislative action. That primarily relates to SGF reappropriations. So a total of 3.1 million SGF was added to FY 23 due to unexpended funds that reappropriated from FY 22. These SGF monies primarily included 1.6 million for design work associated with remodeling the State Defense Building, which was delayed due to protracted bidding process for architectural services. The funds also include 1.1 million for disaster relief payments that shifted into FY 2023 and $237,223 for deferred maintenance projects that were rescheduled for FY 2023. So that reviews some of the adjustments due to reappropriation. We'll look at the agency's estimate. The agency submits a revised estimate of 154.5 million, including 36.4 million SGF in expenditures for FY 2023. This is an all funds increase of 14 million, including an SGF increase of 1.6 million above the 2023 approved amount. The revised estimate includes 293.6 FTE positions, which is a decrease of 0.4 FTE positions below the FY 2023 approved number. The position decrease is in the Emergency Management and Homeland Security program. So looking at some of the adjustments, the first item we'll look at is the supplemental. This is the only supplemental that the agency is requesting for FY 23. Supplemental related to state disaster payments. The agency requests 17.6 million, including 1.6 million SGF, to reimburse eligible expenditures of state, local, and nonprofit organizations for federally declared disasters. The agency notes that payments for federally declared disasters requires a 25% state matching rate. Of this, 10% is provided by the agency. So in other words, an increase of 1.6 million SGF would leverage an additional 17.6 million in federal payments, primarily for severe weather storms and flooding that occurred in June of 2017. Moving on to the next page, 1,376, item number 3, COVID-19 federal relief. The revised estimate includes a decrease of 11.6 million, all from federal COVID-19 relief funds that were provided pursuant to the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan Act for FY 2023. Moving on to item 4, disaster relief payments. So absent the enhancement or the supplemental request that we saw earlier, the revised estimate includes an increase of 5.1 million from federal public assistance and hazard mitigation grant funds, again to reimburse those state, local, and nonprofit organizations for federally declared disasters. Item 5, Federal National Guard Bureau or NGB funding. The revised estimate includes an increase of 3 million from the Federal National Guard Bureau funds. This increase is primarily attributed to capital improvements for design and initial construction phase of a Joint Forces headquarters on federal property at Forbes Field in Topeka. The increase is partially offset by decreased expenditures from federal National Guard Bureau funds for other operational purposes. So you'll see as we go through this, the agency did request expenditures for this Joint Forces headquarters, both in FY22 and FY23, and you'll see when we get to the governor's recommendation, she does adjust that. Item 6, all other adjustments. You'll see other adjustments primarily include decreased expenditures from special revenue funds for calibration of radiation detection devices. Other adjustments include the deletion of 1 FTE position in the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Program, which is partially offset by the increase of 0.6 FTE part-time position in the Administration Program. So finally, we'll look at the governor's recommendation. The governor recommends $164.2 million, including $36.4 million SGF in FY 2023. This is an increase of $9.6 million, all from special revenue funds, above the FY 23 revised estimate. The recommendation includes 293.6 FTE positions, which is unchanged from the agency's request. And the governor's adjustments include item 7, inaugural expenses. The recommendation includes an increase of $25,000, all from special revenue funds for activities associated with the 2023 inauguration. These expenditures are reimbursed by the inaugural committee. Item 8 is the Joint Forces Headquarters construction. The recommendation includes a total of $17.6 million, all from federal NGB funds for construction of that Joint Forces Headquarters in FY 2023, which is an increase of $9.6 million above the 2023 revised estimate. The adjustment would encumber funds for the entire project in FY 2023 rather than splitting them across multiple years. Mr. Chairman, that is a quick run through of FY 2023. I can stand for questions or move on to 2024.
Any questions from Merle on 23? Representative Raspman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On 1375, on number 2, mention about winter storms and flooding that occurred in 2017. Why is there a delay in payment?
Right, because these are largely reimbursement funds. So often these involve mitigation to some of the disasters. So an example may be there was a flooding that damaged dikes. And so part of the mitigation funding can be to repair those dikes. So that work may not occur until a couple of years after the initial event occurred, and then the reimbursement process. So you will see a delay sometimes in the years between when the funding is requested and when the disaster actually occurred.
Any further questions? All right, we'll move on to 24.
All right, we're going to look on page 1378. Agency requests $143.9 million, including $36.3 million SGF for FY 2024. This is an all funds decrease of $10.6 million, including an SGF decrease of $110,166, below the FY 23 revised estimate. The request includes 293.6 FTE positions, which is unchanged from FY 2023. You'll see here, we'll get into a list of enhancement requests. The agency has 4 enhancement requests listed in priority. So the first item you would see is of higher priority than the 4th item that you'll see. Among those are item 1, an enhancement for state disaster payments. Very similar to FY 2023, the agency requests $20.9 million, including $1.9 million to reimburse expenses for federally declared disasters. Item 2 is enhancement for rehabilitation and repair. The agency requests $2 million, including $1 million SGF, for additional routine rehabilitation and repair among 38 armories and other National Guard facilities. The agency notes that there is generally a cooperative agreement with the Federal National Guard Bureau that provides a 50% match on those. Item 3, an enhancement related to the State Defense Building remodel. Agency requests $22.6 million SGF for a complete remodeling of the State Defense Building in Topeka, which houses the Kansas Division of Emergency Management and the State Emergency Operations Center. The agency notes that the current configuration is inadequate and lacks sufficient space to support 24-hour operations of the Emergency Operations Center during periods of activation, lacks technology to meet emerging threats, and lacks briefing and training facilities. Item 4 is an enhancement request for the Office of Emergency Communication. The agency requests 178,000 SGF for the Office of Emergency Communications in FY 2024 to offset the elimination of a transfer from the State Highway Fund. For a number of years prior to FY 2023, this Office of Emergency Communication had received an extraordinary transfer from the State Highway Fund. That ended in FY 22, so the agency is requesting SGF to make up the difference on elimination of that source. Item 5, COVID-19 federal relief funds. Again, we see the request includes a decrease of $500,000, all from COVID-19 relief funds. Item 6, disaster relief payments. So absent that enhancement request, the request includes a decrease of $33.7 million, including $4.5 million SGF, due to an anticipated decrease in reimbursement of eligible expenses. Item 7 is capital improvements. The request includes a decrease of $21.9 million, including $21 million SGF in capital improvement expenditures for FY 2024. Decrease is primarily attributed to expenditures for construction of a new Hayes Armory, totaling $18.1 million. That occurs in FY 2023, but does not reoccur in FY 2024. And the agency budgeted $8 million, all from federal funds, to continue construction of that Joint Forces headquarters. Item 9 addresses other adjustments. Moving on to the governor's recommendation, the governor recommends $112.1 million, including $13.9 million SGF in FY 2024. This is an all funds decrease of $31 million, including an SGF decrease of $23.3 million below the FY 2024 requested amount. The governor's recommendation includes 293.6 FTE, which is unchanged from the agency's request. So what were the significant adjustments implemented by the governor? Item 9 relates to the enhancements for rehabilitation and repair. The governor recommends partial support for this. The recommendation includes $1 million, including $500,000 SGF for additional building maintenance in FY 2024. This is a decrease of $1 million below the agency's request. Further, the recommendation splits those expenditures between rehabilitation and repair and deferred maintenance. Item 10, enhancement for the State Defense Building. The governor does not recommend SGF for this purpose in FY 2024. Item 11, an enhancement for the Office of Emergency Communications. The governor did not recommend this enhancement. And item 12, Joint Forces Headquarters construction. Again, the governor recommendation includes a decrease of $8 million in federal funds for construction of the Joint Forces Headquarters in FY 24. The adjustment really reflects the increase in FY 23. Remember, we're expending the full amount in FY 23, which means there would be a decrease in FY 24. That's a quick run through of the analysis. You can see on page 1381 is some additional details on those supplemental and enhancement requests. I would just draw your attention to the next page on 1382, provides some additional details on the State Defense Building remodel. If you'll remember, that agency did request $22.6 million all SGF, facility houses, KDEM, and the State Emergency Operations Center. State Emergency Operations Center is the state's primary site for coordinating disaster response with local communities and processing emergency situation intelligence. That facility was built in 1978, and the agency notes the current configuration is inadequate, lacks adequate space, lacks amenities for 24 hours operations, lacks technology improvements sufficient to meet emerging threats, and some other items listed there. You would see on a paragraph below that the remodel of the existing State Defense Building structure is preferred due to the facility's location. The remodel of the existing structure is preferred rather than construction of a new facility elsewhere. And that's primarily due to the facility's location within a secure site at 2800 Southwest Topeka Boulevard. The agency does note a request for funding from the Federal American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, was submitted to the Spark Task Force for remodel of the State Defense Building. At the time of budget submission, there had been no determination on that. The agency did report, though, in late January that they were notified that the total of $22.6 million in federal ARPA funds was approved for the state defense building remodel. The next pages describe each program in detail and provide some performance measures related to those programs. I would just draw the committee's attention quickly to page 1,394. It is the capital improvements portion. The Adjutant General's Department is responsible for facilities that include National Guard readiness centers or armories, State Defense Building in Topeka, the Great Plains Joint Training Center in Salina, the Air National Guard facilities at McConnell Air Force Base in Wichita and Forbes Field in Topeka, and various other locations. Looking at the bottom of page 1,394, the agency submits a revised estimate of $39.3 million, including $23.5 million SGF for capital improvements in FY 2023. This is an all funds increase of $7.7 million, including an SGF increase of $1.9 million. The SGF increase is primarily attributed to that design work for the proposed remodel of the State Defense Building. So you'll see they're asking for $1.9 million for design work in 2023, and there would be $22.6 million in ARPA funds available for the construction in 2024. You'll see a list of projects on page 1,395. I would just draw your attention to that new Hayes Armory. We haven't talked much about that yet. The revised estimate includes $18.1 million SGF for a new National Guard armory in Hayes. These expenditures include land purchase with site improvements and the construction of a 49,792 square foot National Guard Readiness Center. Agency notes the current armory is over 60 years old, located in a floodplain, lacks adequate capacity for training and maintenance of modern vehicles. This project was approved by the 2022 legislature. You will see on the right column there that item called federal match. Earlier, we talked about that for rehabilitation and deferred maintenance, the National Guard Bureau will provide a federal match. This describes that federal match in FY 2022. We've already discussed the Joint Forces Headquarters construction. A couple of other items there is the Great Bend FMS. The revised estimate includes $3 million, all from federal funds for the initial phase in remodeling the field maintenance shop at the Great Bend Armory. That project includes construction of a maintenance bay and alteration of existing bays previously storing mobile radar systems. That shop will provide regional maintenance services for 115 military vehicles assigned to units in western Kansas. You'll also see an item on their Smoky Hill Range fire truck. The revised estimate includes $900,000, all from federal funds, to construct a steel frame building at the Smoky Hill Range complex in Salina, storing 5 fire trucks response vehicles. Those vehicles are currently stored off-site, and the agency notes that housing them on-site would facilitate response. Governor recommends, looking on page 1,396, the governor recommends $48.9 million, including $23.5 million SGF for capital improvements in 2023. This is an increase of $9.6 million, all from federal funds. This increase is really attributed to expending the full amount of $17.6 million for that Joint Forces Headquarters construction in 2023. FY24, you'll see many of the same. You'll see some of the same expenditures. I would note for the State Defense Building model, again, here's where we see that expenditure of $22.6 million SGF. The governor, looking on the governor's recommendation, governor recommends $10.4 million for capital improvements in 2024. It's an all funds decrease of $31.6 million, including an SGF decrease of $23.1 million below the requested amount. The recommendation includes a decrease of $8 million, all from federal funds for construction of that Joint Forces Headquarters, which really reflects encumbering the entire expenditure in 2023. The recommendation also includes a decrease of $22.6 million SGF due to the governor not recommending remodel of the State Defense Building, which we have now, the agency has now received notice that would be covered by ARPA funds. Mr. Chairman, this budget, the capital improvement budget, was heard by the Joint Committee on State Building Construction. The State Building Construction recommended appropriating that $22.6 million in federal ARPA funds for the State Defense Building remodel in FY 2024. And I can stand for questions.
Any questions on 24? All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to 1,395 on the new Hayes Armory, that's in the works, correct? That's being funded and the purchase of the new site.
Correct. That funding was approved by the 2022 legislature, and the agency could speak more on that, but I believe they have taken action to initiate searches for that site to locate where to find the real estate to build the structure, and I believe they've entered into some agreements for construction.
So it's not going to be built on the site where the old armory was, correct?
That's correct. It will not be built on the site of the old armory.
Okay, then the next question is, what are we going to do with the building and the land where the old one sits?
I think that would be a question that the agency might have a better idea. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you for certain what the plans are for the old building.
I will hold for that then. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? All right. Thank you, Merle. We will move into the Major General.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good to see you all again. Our small budget, I didn't think it was going to take this long, but here we are. So try to get through my notes quickly and try to answer any questions you may have. So I'm Major General David Weisar. I'm your Adjutant General. I appreciate the opportunity to stand before you to discuss the Adjutant General's Department budget to request included in the governor's budget. As you know, the Adjutant General's Department is responsible for the operations of the Kansas Army and Air National Guard, the Kansas Division of Emergency Management, Homeland Security, and administrative support for the Kansas wing of the Civil Air Patrol. The diverse nature of our agency makes it unique in that it receives funding from both federal and state. As you'll see the budget request, there are portions which are entirely state, some of which are entirely federal, and a split between both federal and state, in which some federal funding is unavailable without the required state match. The department requests include the items that are essential for the execution of our mission in synchronizing multi-agency assets, including integrated planning, coordinating local, state, and federal resources, providing equipped, trained, and ready Army and Air Forces, rapid emergency management response, and a cohesive Homeland Security capability to protect life and property in our state and protect national interests from both Kansas and abroad. Your support for these items is not only critical to our military readiness, but also emergency management activities that support and protect our state and nation. The Adjutant General's Department owns and operates approximately $4 billion worth of assets, including buildings, warehouses, major weapon systems such as tanks and howitzers, rotary and fixed-wing aircraft, and IT equipment. In fiscal year 2022, we received over $400 million in federal dollars and about $10 million in state funds. As you can see, our allocation from the state is a relatively small portion of our overall budget. However, it is a critical piece. The bulk of our funding coming from the federal government, but it comes to the state operations and facilities. Much of it has to be matched by a certain percentage from the state. You'll see that reflected in our budget that Merle went through, and especially in our items that are supplemental or enhancement requests. One exception to that is our Civil Air Patrol. Their operating budget is 100% state funded. Our number one priority for supplementals and enhancements continue to be our deferred maintenance budget. We have 38 armories spread across the state, and then our 3 Air National Guard locations, of which Merle discussed, Wichita, Topeka, and Salina. All total, we have about 220 buildings to maintain in those 38 armories. In 2016, we conducted a statewide facility study that identified and outlined a clear facility improvement plan based on current facility condition and facility functionality. The result of that study indicated that $37.6 million was needed to repair facility infrastructure and to improve facility functionality, which was constructed mostly in the 1950s. We're updating that study this year to look at the progress that has been made specifically over the last 2 years, thanks to some consistent and predictable spending in this area. For fiscal year 2022, we were able to award $1.9 million in state funding for construction projects that was matched with $9.1 million in federal funds. We expended an additional $600,000 in minor maintenance costs exclusively at armories across the state, which was split with a 50-50 federal share. A couple of larger projects that these funds paid for were a parking lot repair in Iola and armory repairs at the Wichita South Armory. In the upcoming year, we plan to work on armory improvements in Kansas City, a new water line in Great Bend, and repair actions at the Reserve Center in Kansas City that we are acquiring. Our second priority is disaster funding. The open disasters in the state and projected state costs associated with these disasters is approximately $17.4 million this year. Most disasters are 75-25 split, in which, as Merle stated, the federal government pays 75% and the state is responsible for 25%. That's further broken down if the counties are responsible for 15% and our state share is 10%. The exception in the open disasters is COVID-19, which was 100% federally funded. And sir, to your question, relative to 2017, those are all public assistance grants, and they take a long time for counties and localities to get the information into us for us to process back to FEMA. So 6 years is not out of the norm. I had the same question when I came to this job 3 years ago. It made me scratch my head of, okay, why are we taking so long to pay these counties and localities back? It's really about the input that we receive from those counties and localities. Again, everybody's working hard. They're not being ignored. It's just, I hate to say it, it is the process. I don't like the process, but yes, sir. So once again, the state match dollars are critical in ensuring that we receive the federal portion to pay for these disasters. In closing, I would like to thank you again for the funding for the new Hayes Armory this past year. We're currently working on the land acquisition piece and look forward to the new 49,000 square foot facility. Thank you for your support and in consideration of our budget requests, and I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Any questions? Are you sure? All right, you got off easy.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, Raphael, I'd like to answer your question relative to the disposition of the armory.
Yes, please.
It depends. So we've got to look at the disposition. Many times it depends on how we acquired that armory in the 1950s. Many times they go back to the city where it's a thank you for loaning it to us since the 1950s. Here you go. Some of them the state owns. I know we had an armory on Douglas Street in Wichita, Kansas, that the state sold here a few years ago. So it's really a depends. We're still looking through all the title work, so I don't have a definitive answer for you. But one way or another, that will leave our department when the new Hayes Armory is finished. So we'll get you a firm answer back when we get it, if that satisfies your need.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. And both of the agencies we had today, both of the heads are retiring. So just a big thank you to you and the colonel as well. But all right, well, that will close our budget hearing on the Adjutant General's office. Also, we will be meeting Thursday when the initial agenda came out. I think you guys got an email today. We will have a presentation Thursday. Shouldn't take too long. And we are adjourned.